Last session, right? So we started discussing about, like what are the cluster operations and how can we perform the cluster operations, and we have also seen like how can we connect to a Postgres database using a PSQL command line, and we have also seen that how can we establish a connection from the PG admin as well. So now let me try connecting to the PG admin. Okay, so let me go to create a server. So the server is February Feb hyphen training. Okay, let me share. Am I sharing my screen? Yes. So go to the connections and provide the IP address of the machine where your Postgres cluster is running. So 192.168.29.125. So username is, I'm trying to connect to a demo database, and the password is admin123, right? So the moment you gave this, so it throws an error stating, so unable to connect to the server, no pg underscore hpa dot conf entry for the host 192.168.29.119. So let me take a snippet of this to understand more. So just, yes. So to which server we are trying to connect? We are trying to connect to a Postgres server which is running on 192.168.29.115, right? I mean to say, so the my Postgres server is running on 192.168.29.119, and we are trying to connect from the Windows machine, right? I am trying to connect from the Windows machine through PG admin. And what is the IP address of my Windows machine? 192.168.29.119. And through which user I am trying to connect? I am trying to connect through a demo user to database called Postgres. What is the error? No pg underscore hba dot conf entry. So what does this mean? The host based authentication is failed. So what is host based authentication? So whenever, okay, so here is a client who is sitting on 192.168.29.119. He is trying to connect to a Postgres database. Okay, he is trying to connect to a Postgres database which is running on 192.168.29.125. So how he is connecting? He is connecting through a user called demo with the port number equal to 5432, and he is trying to connect to a database called Postgres. Through which user he is trying to connect? He is trying to connect as a demo user to the Postgres database on the port number 5432. So what happens that whenever the client sends a request, here postmaster is a process. Okay, postmaster is a process which is going to, so if you remember when we were discussing about the postmaster process, so postmaster is going to act as a listener. So what does that mean? So whenever client sends a request for the connection connecting to the database, postmaster accept the request and it performs a special type of authentication called host based authentication. So how the postmaster is going to perform the host based authentication? The postmaster is going to perform the host based authentication using a special type of file called pg underscore hba.conf. So this is the configuration file through which the postmaster is going to perform the host based authentication. So what is the location of this pg underscore hba dot file? The location of the pg underscore hba dot file is data directory. So okay, the location of the pg underscore hp.conf file is a data directory. In our case, what is our data directory? Our data directory is u02 postgres slash data underscore dir. So this is the location where we will be having pg underscore hpa dot conf file. Okay. So whenever client sends a request using this pg underscore hpa dot conf file, it is going to perform the host based authentication. So if the authentication is successful, then the postmaster is going to create a separate file called postgresql server process, and handovers the request to the PostgreSQL server process. If the authentication is failed, then the user is going to get a connection rejection message. So what this pg underscore hp dot exactly contains? Pg underscore hp dot conf file exactly contain list of trusted users, and IP addresses from which, okay, so list of trusted users and IP addresses from which Postgres has to accept the connection. Okay, so pg underscore hp.conf is a configuration file which contains a list of trusted IP addresses and users from which Postgres has to accept the connections. Okay, Postgres has to accept the connections. So, so as a user, I am trying to connect a Postgres database from my Windows machine, which IP is 192.168. 29.119, but as that user is not okay whitelisted in the pg underscore hpa.conf file, that is the reason why the connection has been rejected. So blindly what I am trying to tell you here is, from whichever the IP, okay, from whichever the IP that you are trying to establish a connection to the Postgres database, that IP should be whitelisted on the what? This IP should be whitelisted on the pg underscore hba.conf, okay? Okay, I'll show you in detail. Okay, so as I said, what is the location of this my pg underscore hpa.conf file? The location of the pg underscore hpa.conf file is data directory. So let me go there and show you what are the contents of this data directory. Okay, so let me check so whether the Postgres is running or not. How can I check? ps hyphen eaf grep Postgres. Okay, my Postgres cluster is already running. So what I need to do now, I need to check. Okay, what I need to do now, I need to go to the data directory location u02 Postgres data directory. So now let me check ls. So there is a file called pg underscore hba.conf. Let me open pg underscore hba.conf. Okay, let me go to the end. See, so this is how an entry will be, this is how the entries will be there in the pg underscore hp.conf file. So in order to accept, the Postgres has to accept the connection, your IP address should be whitelisted in where? Your IP address should be whitelisted in the pg underscore hp.conf file. So now we are going to discuss the contents one by one. So what is the first content? Type, database, user, address, and method. So we are going to see these things in detail. So what is the first one? The first one is a type. Okay, type. So in Postgres, not only Postgres, you take any of the database, how many types of connections are there? How many types of connections are there? There are two types of connections. How many types of connections are there? There are two types of connections. One is a local connection. Okay, one is a local connection, and second one is a remote connection, right? One is a local connection and second one is a remote connection. This type in pg underscore hpa.conf file, okay, this type in pg underscore hpa.conf file talks about the type of the connection. So yeah, whether it can be a local connection or remote connection. So what does it mean by local connection? Local connection means if you are trying to if you are trying to connect to a Postgres database from the same server on which the Postgres is already running. So what does it mean by a local connection? You are sitting on the same server on which the Postgres cluster is running. Okay, you are on the same server in which the Postgres cluster is already running, and you are trying to connect, then that connection we call it as a local connection. Okay, and what does it mean remote connection? Your Postgres is running on some server like 192.168.29.125, but you are trying to connect to your Postgres database from somewhere. In my case, whatever the connection that I was trying to establish through pgadmin, we call it as a remote connection, because my pgadmin is installed in the Windows with the IP address of 192.168.29.119, and I'm trying to connect to a database which is running on some other server remotely. So this connection we call it as a remote connection. So type can be either local. Local talks about the local connections, and type can be host. So what does it mean by host? Host means, okay, host means it is a remote connection. And there is another thing also there, host. So when we say host, it is going to accept both SSL and non-SSL connections. What is SSL and non-SSL, that we will be discussing in later. Okay, so and we will also let the postmaster to accept only SSL connections by mentioning like host SSL. We can also let the postmaster to accept the only non-SSL connections by using host no SSL. More about this we'll be discussing in the later classes. But for now, type talks about the type of the connection. Either it can be a local connection or remote connection. Local connection will be mentioned with, okay, local connection will be mentioned with, like local, and remote connection will be mentioned with the host. When we place, when we like add it connection type as a host, which means it is a remote connections. In our example, through pgadmin which we are trying to connect, is it a local connection or remote connection? It is a remote connection. So what I need to mention here, I need to mention the host here. Okay, now let's talk about the database. Okay, now let's talk about the database. What is the next attribute that we need to talk? We need to talk about the database. Okay, so database means the DB which you are trying to connect. Okay, DB which you are trying to connect. In our case, through pgadmin, to which database we are trying to connect? We are trying to connect as a Postgres database. So you can mention the multiple database using db1 comma db2 comma db3. Likewise, also you can mention all refers to all the databases that are available in the Postgres cluster. Okay, that are available in the Postgres. A database can be a single database name, or you can mention the multiple databases separated with commas, or you can mention it as a all, which refers to all the databases that are available in the Postgres cluster. Okay, all the databases that are available in the Postgres cluster. And it can also take one more option called replication. So which means this will be used while setting up the streaming replication or while taking a backup called PG underscore base backup. So as replication or PG underscore base backup connection is going to work in a replication protocol. So whatever the user that we are trying to use to set up the replication, that user should have a replication entry in the pg underscore hp.conf file. So the database means to which database you are trying to connect. Okay, so if you want to connect to if you want to allow the connection to a single database, then you can mention a single database name. If you want to allow connections to the multiple databases, then you need to separate each database name with commas, or you can simply mention all the databases that are available in the Postgres cluster by simply mentioning it all. or you can keep replication to allow the replication protocol. So as per the error, or in our case, to which database we are trying to connect? We are trying to connect to the database called Postgres. So here what I need to mention? So on the database I am going to mention like Postgres. So user, the next entry that in the pg underscore hp.conf file is user. Okay, user talks about through which user you are trying to connect a, through which user you are trying to establish a connection. So the user means username, and multiple users can be mentioned with username 1 comma username 2 comma username 3, and we can also mention like all, which talks about all the users in Postgres cluster, all the users in Postgres cluster. So in our case, through which user you are trying to connect, through which user you are trying to connect, you are trying to connect as a demo user, right? You are trying to connect as a demo user. So I have mentioned use under user, I have mentioned as a demo. And next talks about addresses. Address talks about from which IP address, from which IP address connection needs to be allowed. Okay, from which IP address connection needs to be allowed. So from which IP address, in our case I'm trying to connect from 192.168.29.119. This is the IP address of my Windows machine, from which I am trying to establish the connectivity to my Postgres server, which is running on 192.168.29.125, and we need to mention it as a CIDR notation. What is the CIDR notation by 32? So CIDR notation refers to classless internet domain range. Classless internet domain range. Okay. So do we need to know more about this? No, it's not required. So why we need to mention this 192.168.29.119 by 32? This notation we call it as what? CIDR, classless internet domain range. So how can we, so what is the, why we need to mention, right? So 192.168.29.119 by 32, resolves to only one IP. So what does it mean by resolving to only one IP? Let me check CIDR to IP range. Okay, CIDR to IP ranges. Let me open this. What happened to this? 1 minute. Yeah, CIDR to IP range. So now let me give you the IP address. So 192.168.29.119 by 32. So when you do a convert, so what is the first IP? 192.168.29.119, and the second last IP would be 192.168.29.119 only. So let's say, so why we need to provide it as a IP range, sorry, CIDR notation, right? Let's say you have a group of IP addresses. Okay, let's say you have a group of IP addresses from which you need to allow the connections. So then I'll give you like 24. So when I give like 192.168.29.119 by 24, and so the starting IP would be 192.168.29.0, and the ending IP would be 192.168.29.255. So whatever the connections that are coming from, okay, whatever the connections that are coming, whatever the connections that are coming from, okay, whatever the connections that are coming from in between these two, 29.0, 29.1, and 29 dot, okay, 29.2 till 29.255, all the connections will be allowed. Okay, so that is the reason why we need to mention it as a CIDR notation. So the next thing is, so this is addresses. So what I need to mention, 192.168.29.119 by 32. So, and the method, the last one that we are going to talk about is the last one that we need to talk about is a method. So method means if it is a password, then it is going to ask you for the password. If it is a trust, then it will not ask you for the password. The connections will be simply allowed, and we have a MD5, so which means only MD5 type of connections passwords will be allowed. This will be discussing during the advanced concepts. Okay, so password means, so whenever the user is trying to connect, it will prompt you for the password. So trust means it will not ask you for the password, and fourth one is reject. So irrespective of the connections, so the connection will be simply rejected. So here we are trying to connect, and in my case I wanted to ask the password while connecting, so I'm providing it as a password. So the type of connection that we are going to do is a host connection. The database which you are trying to connect is a Postgres. The user through which you are trying to establish the connection is a demo. And from where we are trying to establish the connection, we are trying to establish the connection from 192.168.29.119, and it should prompt you for the password. Okay, it should prompt you for the password. So I'm saving it now. And one more thing is, like, if you remember, when we were discussing about, okay, when we were discussing about the cluster operations in Postgres, we have discussed about an operation called reload. So what is the purpose of the reload? Reload is a cluster operation in Postgres to reread the configuration file. To do what? To reread the configuration file, to reread the configuration file. So whenever you do any changes to any of the configuration file, then you need to reload the configuration file. How can we reload? So pg underscore ctl is a utility through which you can reload the configuration file. So the syntax is pg underscore ctl hyphen d slash u02 postgres data underscore directory reload. Okay, this is how you will reload. So the point that you need to remember is, whenever you do any changes in the pg underscore hba.conf file, you need to perform a reload. So okay, so I did some changes. So otherwise, before reloading, what is going to happen, that we are going to see now. Okay, I haven't reloaded, just I did the changes, but I have not reloaded anything. Okay, I have not reloaded anything. Then we'll see what is going to happen. Okay, so where is my pgadmin? Yes, here it is. Okay, again let me try connecting. What is the error again? It is showing unable to connect to the server, connection failed, no pg underscore hpa.conf entry. Right now, so as I said, whenever you do any changes, you need to reload. So pg underscore ctl hyphen d slash u02 postgres data directory reload. So does reload needs a downtime? Does reload needs a downtime? No, because reload is going to just reread all the configuration files. So the reload is done. Now let me try to connect. See, the connection has been established. So this is how host-based authentication works in Postgres. See, the connection has been established to the database which is running on 192.168.29.115. Now let me disconnect from the server. So from that, you should get an idea like how this host-based authentication work. So the postmaster process, whenever you're trying to send a connection request, the postmaster is going to perform this host-based authentication using pg underscore hba.conf file to accept or reject the connections. So the next thing that we are going to discuss is, again on the same connection, I'm going to just go to the properties and go to the connections. Instead of Postgres database, I am planning to connect to a demo database. Okay, I am planning to connect to a demo database. Let me save it. Let me save it. I saved it, and let me try to connect. So what is the it is asking for the password. So admin 123. What is the error? there is no pg underscore hp.conf entry for the host 192.168.29.119 for the user demo for the database demo. We have already added a pg. 1 minute. Sorry, so we have already added an entry in the pg underscore hp.conf file, right? But how the still connection is getting rejected? The connection is getting rejected because so we have added for only Postgres database, but here through which user you are trying to connect? You are trying to connect as you are trying to connect to a demo database, but here we have added only which database? We have added only Postgres database. So let me add demo as well. So now, okay. Now I did a reload. Now let me try to check. See, connection is established. So now what I'll do, right? Again, I'll connect to a Postgres database from here and check what are the databases that are available. So now I'll try to connect a test database. So let me disconnect here and go to properties, take connection, and maintenance database is test. Okay, maintenance database is test. So let me save it and connect to the database. See, what is error? No PG underscore HB conf entry for the host 192.168.29.119 for the user demo and for the database test. So what I need to do again, just go here. So instead of keeping one by one, right, just I'm going to keep it as all. Okay, let me save it. So whenever you do any changes, you need to go for a reloading of the cluster. And for reloading, you can do it in two ways. One is pg underscore reload. This is how you can do reload, or you can connect to any of the Postgres cluster and you can run select pg underscore reload underscore conf. This is also you can do. These are the two ways through which you can perform a reload. Now let me connect to the Postgres database, select pg underscore reload underscore conf. I did. Now let me try to connect. See, the connection has been established. So now what I'm trying to do, right? Now let me disconnect from the server first. Now what I'm planning to do, right, whatever the connections that are coming from, okay, whatever the connections that are coming from, I need to just simply do what? I need to simply reject. Okay, so I have a requirement that so whatever the connections that are coming from 192.168.29.119, I need to simply reject it. So what I will do, just I will perform, I'll made it as a reject here. So when I do a reject, reload. So when I do reject, simply it won't check anything. So simply what it will do, it will reject the connections. See, no pg_hpa.conf rejects the connections from 192.168.29.119. So whatever the connections that are coming from 192.168.29.119, those connections will be rejected. Okay, let me make the changes back. Okay, so again I'll make it as a trust here. Okay, trust means whatever the connections that are coming from 192.168.29.119, and it should not ask you for the password. See, it will not ask you for the password. Okay, did I reload? I haven't performed a reload, right? So simply I won't, did I enter any password? No, simply it got connected. That's how the pg_hpa.conf file should be configured to help the postmaster to perform the host based authentication. So how can we decode this file? So how can we decode this file means, let me open the Postgres. See, so let's take this line as an example. So whatever the connections, whatever the remote connect, so Postgres, if the connection that is coming from 192.168.29.119, and it is trying to connect as a demo user to the databases that are available in the Postgres cluster, then that connection should be allowed without asking any password. This is how you need to decode the line. So if the connection is coming from 192.168.29.119 and the username is demo, and if it is connecting to the databases that are available in the Postgres cluster, then the connection has to be accepted. So that is how you need to mention. Okay, that is how you need to mention the pg_hpa.conf file to help the Postgres to postmaster process to perform the host based authentication. So this is about the host based authentication in Postgres. And this host based authentication, if you are going to use, okay, if you are going to use AWS RDS, which is where in which your, if your clusters are running on cloud, AWS cloud, then there is no such concept of pg_hpa, because on RDS we don't have access to the underlying operating system, so there is no such concept. But it is very important to know, and you can expect at least one question from the pg_hpa.conf file. So what is host based authentication, how can we perform, and what are all the entries that they might ask you. So this is about the host based authentication in Postgres. And so that's it for today, and tomorrow we are going to see how can we manage the parameters in Postgres. Any doubts so far? Or yes.
In database, could you please explain the replication? What is the
So
replication that I
you
can
cannot
understand?
understand now. So as I said, when it is a replicate, when you are going to perform a streaming replication in Postgres, or when you are going to take a physical backup using pg_base backup utility, these utilities are going to work on a replication protocol. So for that, we need to add an entry as a replication so that the pg base backup will get successful. More about this, you will be seeing it in the pg base backup. So for now, what you need to remember is pg_base backup is going to work on a replication protocol. So if you so let's say I have a user called Hari, through which you are trying to initiate the pg base backup. For that Hari user, the in the pg_hp.conf file, you need to make an entry as a replication instead of database name. Okay, so instead of the database name, simply here you need to mention it as a, under the database you need to mention it as a replication. Okay, that more about that you will be seeing it in the replication classes. For the simply, so it works on a replication protocol. So to accept the connections from the pg base backup, you have to made an entry as a replication. Okay.
There is an MD5 in the methods. So could you please again repeat the MD5?
MD5, right? So MD5 is a type of a password encryption. So I cannot explain now, that we will be covering it in the advanced topics, because if you want to make it as an MD5, MD5 is a one of the password encryption method. So we need to change couple of parameters like RDS dot there is a parameter called password underscore encryption. So you need to make it as MD5. So if the password is of type MD5, then only it will accept. That we will be discussing it in advanced classes. Okay, if I'll explain also, you will not able to get it, because We have not done with the user management. Once the user management is done, now I will be changing that parameter to MD5, and I'll, so whenever you change a parameter password underscore encryption to MD5, you need to reset all the passwords of the users which are available in the Postgres cluster to make the password compatible with the MD5. Once that is done, then only, so if the user is trying to connect to a Postgres database and if the password type is of MD5, then only it will accept the connection.
Okay.
Anything else? If not,
Yeah,
then
yeah. Could you please share the notes?
notes. Okay, I'll share it.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll share it. Thank you. I'll upload the same thing in the drive. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And
Thank you.
regarding the earlier class also notes, it will
Yeah,
be
everything
possible.
I'll share. I'll share everything.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Bye. We'll connect tomorrow again.